Moving away from the face for a moment, let's draw in the jacket. Now, there is a possibility, of course, of layering the Joker's shoulders even higher with that coat he wears, the trench coat. But even so, remember that a jacket like he wears is quite heavy, so it's not going to be at all in line with his shoulders. Because of the pose in this case, it'll be bunched up behind his neck, and then the shoulders themselves will come inwards, creating their own shallow trench in the center. Also follow the seam lines of a jacket like this, which means that where the shoulder meets the arm, meets the sleeve, it'll be quite well defined. And then also from the top of the neck, making quite an intense V down, because you'll tend to wear it shut in a very dignified fashion, and then filling in the collar just of the shirt peeping through, and the large Texan bow he tends to sport. Not a great deal of difference in this particular drawing. Only difference is I've added in the lapels of his jacket, which of course taper out and then in this style. I've also added his boutonniere, which in classic 70s and previous style will tend to be a rose, although it has been seen as a flower, and a particularly exotic flower in some circumstances. Then also making sure that one can imagine a fully fleshed body under here, adding the other side of the jacket. I've also just increased the shadowing at his frown lines. And now here in the final stage of penciling, I have finally added in the eyeballs themselves. This is merely an idiosyncratic thing of mine. I feel that one shouldn't add in the eyebrows until one is absolutely done, because it adds the soul to the drawing. And then I've also added in the lower lapels. When I begin with the inking, I start once more at the center of the face, which is the top of the nose, drawing very clearly defined silhouette lines, and then some very gradual gradient lines around the rest of the face. The end of the nose shall have a slight gradient on it, and some very, very strong eyebrow lines. Now, there is the possibility of leaving the eyebrows transparent, just with an outline, and they colour them in green later. I just tend to make solid black eyebrows because they make him look more theatrical. And then the crow's feet themselves can be fairly extravagantly applied in hatching gradient lines. Then of course the outline of the eyes, remembering the very small area they've been given because of the rest of the facial features, squishing them in like that. They've got quite a long angular style to them. In fact, in this drawing it occurred to me that the eyes were perhaps too long, and I reminded myself to add the small area of pink flesh found in the corner of the eye. I don't know what the technical name is for that either. Then adding in the lips at this stage is very exciting because it really brings the face alive. And having done that, you can really know exactly what you're doing with those chinward lines. And here I've also added in the cleft of the chin and made sure that because his mouth is pulling outwards, it'll tighten the skin quite severely on the bottom of the chin, meaning that we'll get quite a good idea of the shape of the skull bone underneath that. So you'll have a flat bottom of the chin, and then going along, again very severely, the side of the chin upwards into those lines. This is where it becomes clear that the Joker's facial muscles really don't follow the normal rules of human physics. That is, once they're frowning towards the nose, they also have the ability, the top of those arching eyebrows have the ability to push the flesh upwards, so he can look both slightly angry and slightly amused at the same time. So we've got ridges of flesh being pushed upwards toward the forehead. Also here, fill in that very sharp angular edge of the jawbone and taper it upwards so that it flows naturally into the ear, which is itself not too petite and in some cases slightly elfin. I think for me this is probably the most amusing, entertaining stage of the inking, which is the hair, because it's so wild. There's so much one can do. I tend to start with the very front hairs because they will then be foremost in terms of the camera's view, so everything behind will have to tuck below them or behind them or whatever. But really just following those lines from the front of the widow's peak back into the duck curve and then scooping around the ear. It takes a while because you, in this style, are really drawing clumps of hair rather than in the anime style or even the animated series style, merely the silhouette of hair. But I think that this really does exaggerate the wildness of not only his hair but his overall personality. On the inking stage, I feel it's best to work from the centre outward, so as not to, at the ultimate stage, end up with a lack of space. So now working downwards from the neck, being aware of the very slightly visible areas of neck skin, the collar, and of course the tie of his bow tie, very largely obscured by his chin, and then the bloominess of that very extravagant tie, which has of course its own particular areas of shading. By drawing 14, the general shape of his body has taken shape rather. The boutonniere, the rose boutonniere in this case, has been inked, which is, for me, a hell of a job. I'm sure it's easier for some people. I find it very difficult to visualize all those different petals. Then, of course, the ridging of the jacket at the back of the neck, and then following down into that trench I mentioned earlier, and then back up into the shoulder and the seam of the sleeve meeting the shoulder. Then where the elbow is bent, we have small folds of material, not too deep, because what we're dealing here is very thick jacket material, so it won't really pucker too easily. It will rather tend to form, very subtle trenches. And then, of course, the seam begins to be visible at the top of the jacket. And now finally we add the most crucial areas of his face, the eyes, giving you his multifarious personality, trying to hack into your very soul, and then his teeth, which could physically do the very same thing. You need to keep in mind, again, because of the drawing back of the lips, the fact that you will see the edge of the gums in most versions of the Joker. In fact, in some you see grotesque areas of gum. I myself am kind of tied to science, so I believe that you wouldn't be able to see that much generally, because there isn't that much between the lips and the teeth. But at any rate, we've got quite a predatory look about him. I mean, I understate this. It's an enormously predatory look. And yet, in the eyes of some colorophiles, rather smexy. There you are. And now here we have the post-inking stage. I've erased all my pencil lines, and I've added a number of different textures and hatches. Gradient lines along the subtle areas, as in the edges of the teeth. Some shadows cast in cross-hatch on the jacket, to keep in mind the different textures. And some very subtle shadow hatches throughout the hair, thrown by the front of the bouffant, and along the sides of his face, and the shadow areas and the front areas of the bow. So there you have it. That is how I generally draw Mr. J. I hope it's been helpful to you, and I hope that you can adapt what I've done here to your own particular drawing style. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. La 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 la.